On the night of the full moon, the cemetery of Monteluse breathes, and the dead are not alone. They say every town has its secrets, but in the small, forgotten village of Monteluse, there lies a secret so unsettling that even the oldest among them refuse to talk about it openly. At the farthest edge of the village, where the dirt roads end and the trees twist like blackened claws against the sky, rests the ancient cemetery. Its rusted iron gates lean against broken hinges, its walls cracked and covered in vines. Yet no one dares to restore it. No one dares to enter. A dense fog rolls in every evening, blanketing the graves in a pale shroud that never lifts even when the sun rises. The villagers whisper that the fog is not natural, that it clings because the souls inside are restless, forever searching for warmth in a world that has forgotten them. Children are told stories to keep them away, stories of pale faces in the mist, and voices that whisper your name when the moon is high. Most obey out of fear, but one young man, Marcos, was not like the rest. He had grown up hearing the legends, laughing at them, even teasing the old men who spoke in hushed voices around the fire. To him, ghosts were stories for the weak-minded, and yet, deep down, some part of him wanted to see. Some part of him needed to know if the old cemetery was truly as cursed as they claimed. So on the night of the full moon, when the village slept under pale silver light, Marcos left his house with a camera slung over his shoulder and a flashlight in his trembling hand. His steps echoed unnaturally as he approached the gate, and though his heart raced, he forced a smile. He told himself it was nothing but superstition. The gate moaned when he pushed it open, a sound that seemed far too loud for the stillness of the night. Inside, the air was colder, heavier, as though every breath was weighed down by unseen eyes watching him. Cracked tombstones leaned at odd angles, some nearly swallowed by the earth. The names carved into them had faded, the dead lying beneath long forgotten. The fog thickened as he walked, wrapping around his legs, creeping higher with every step. He raised his flashlight, the beam slicing through the mist in weak streaks. Every now and then he thought he saw movement at the edge of its light, shadows that slipped away when he turned toward them. The night was alive with small noises, the rustle of leaves, the groan of the trees, the faint scuttle of unseen creatures in the grass. But beneath it all, he felt something else, something steady, a quiet pulse, as if the ground itself was breathing. At the center of the cemetery, Marcos stopped. Here the graves stood older, the stones worn smooth and broken. His skin prickled with unease, his breath puffing white in the freezing air. His flashlight began to flicker, the beam quivering, and then it sputtered out completely. He shook it desperately, smacked it with his palm,
but it remained dark. And then came the whispers. At first, they were so faint that he thought it was only the wind slipping through the cracked stones. But the more he listened, the more certain he became. The whispers had shape. They had intent. They were calling his name.
Marcos. His heart thundered in his chest. The whispers came from everywhere at once, curling through the fog, pressing into his ears, his mind. He spun in circles, flashlight useless in his hand, eyes wide and straining against the dark. His name grew louder, carried on dozens of voices that overlapped, one over another, until they became cries, wails of sorrow that pierced the night like knives. His knees weakened. Fear froze him in place. And then, in the corner of the graveyard, he saw it. A faint glow seeping from the earth, from the oldest of the tombs. His body moved before his mind could stop it, his steps dragging him closer. The ground trembled, soil shifting as pale fingers broke through the dirt. Slowly, agonizingly, the figure of a woman rose, her hair cascading over a dress from centuries past, her face pale as the moon. Her hollow eyes locked on his, and the world seemed to fall silent. Marcos could not breathe. He could not move. Her lips never parted, but her voice poured directly into his mind. You have disturbed our rest, but we do not fear you. Share in our loneliness, know our sorrow. The earth around him groaned, more graves stirred. One by one, figures emerged, men, women, even children, each one pale, broken, their clothes torn with the weight of time. They surrounded him in a silent circle, their eyes hollow, their arms outstretched. Marcos spun, desperate to flee, but every path curved back to the center. The fog bent space itself, trapping him. The circle of souls moved closer, their hands inches from his skin, cold air spilling from them like ice. The cries rose again, low, mournful, endless. He tried to scream, but his throat was locked. He was drowning in their sorrow, drowning in their need. And then, suddenly, the moon slipped behind a cloud. The light vanished, the cries stopped, silence crushed the night. Marcos's flashlight flickered back to life, casting its glow on the empty graves. The circle was gone, the woman was gone, only the fog remained. With a broken gasp, Marcos bolted, his legs finally obeying him. He did not look back. He ran until the gate slammed shut behind him, until the safety of his house closed around him. Only then did he dare to breathe again. But his terror was not finished, for when he checked his camera, his hands still trembling, he found the truth staring back at him. Blurry images filled the screen, shadows caught mid-step, eyes hollow, arms reaching, not tricks of light, not illusions, proof that he had not imagined a single thing. From that night onwards, Marcos was never the same. His laughter vanished. His eyes grew hollow, and when the full moon rose, he would sit at his window, staring into the fog, waiting,
hoping never to see them again, but also fearing that one night he would. The people of Monteluz still speak of him. They warn travelers not to walk past the graveyard, not to tempt the souls that dwell within, for the whispers never stopped. The fog never lifted, and those who pass too close on nights of the full moon swear they hear their names carried softly on the wind. Perhaps it is only imagination. Perhaps it is nothing but fear. But if you ever find yourself in Monteluz on such a night, and the whispers begin to call you by name, do not turn toward them, because once the dead know you, they will never forget you.
At the very top of a lonely hill, surrounded by mist that never seemed to lift, there stood an ancient cemetery. The people of the nearby town called it the resting place of the Guardian. To the ordinary eye, it was nothing more than a graveyard. Old stones leaning against the weight of time, iron gates rusting in silence, and trees that whispered when the wind passed through. But to those who knew the stories, this place held a truth far more unsettling. For its guardian was no ordinary spirit. It was the soul of a great black dog, a creature whose glowing eyes pierced through the darkness, watching, waiting, and protecting the eternal sleep of the dead. Long ago, when the cemetery was still young, there lived a humble gravedigger. He was a quiet man, devoted to his work, caring for the tombs with reverence, ensuring the departed were never left unattended. His only companion was his loyal dog, a massive beast with a noble presence who followed him everywhere, through the fog, the rain, and the silence of nights spent among graves. When the gravedigger passed away, the people buried him in the very cemetery he had tended his entire life. His faithful dog refused to leave his side. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, until the dog too lay down upon the grave of his master and never rose again. But death did not break their bond. The animal's spirit lingered, unwilling to abandon the duty it had shared in life. From that time on, the Guardian was born, a spectral hound prowling the grounds, forever protecting the peace of the souls resting there. Generations passed, and though the cemetery grew older, the tales of the Guardian remained alive. The elders of the town told children never to trespass at night, never to mock the place, for those who disturbed the stillness of the dead would meet the gaze of the great black dog and regret their foolishness. Some laughed at these warnings, dismissing them as old superstitions meant to scare the young. Yet no one could deny that the cemetery carried an air of dread. One fateful evening, under a pale and cloud-covered moon, a group of young people from the town decided to test the legend. Driven by a mix of disbelief and a hunger for thrill, they made their way up the lonely hill. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and bravado, they ignored the whispered warnings of their elders. They wanted proof that the Guardian was nothing more than a bedtime story. As they reached the rusted gates, the air turned colder. Their laughter echoed unnaturally, swallowed by the fog that crept between the graves. At first, they joked, taking pictures and making fun of the crumbling tombstones, but soon a strange heaviness fell upon them. The wind picked up, rattling branches, carrying with it a low, mournful sound that did not seem entirely natural. The further they walked, the more uneasy they became. Their lights flickered, shadows stretched unnaturally long, and silence pressed against their ears between each gust of wind. Then it happened. David, the boldest of the group, suddenly felt it, that undeniable sense that someone or something was right behind him. He turned, and in the darkness beyond his flashlight beam, he saw them, two glowing eyes. Eyes not of man, but of a beast. A massive dog emerged, its fur so black it seemed to swallow the light around it. Its size was unnatural, towering, its presence suffocating. The young people froze, their breath caught in their throats. And then, in that stillness, a deep voice echoed through the air, not from the dog's mouth, but as though the very wind had chosen to speak. Calm, powerful, and commanding, it said, "Those who disturb the rest of the dead must ask for forgiveness and offer respect. Only then will the Guardian allow your departure." The words pierced them deeper than any threat could. The laughter, the arrogance, the disbelief, all of it drained away in an instant. Fear filled their hearts, but more than fear, shame weighed on them. One by one, trembling and pale, they whispered their apologies. They swore never to defile the peace of that place again, never to laugh at what they could not understand. The Guardian stood silently, his glowing eyes watching them. The moments dragged like hours, each heartbeat thundering in their ears. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, the dog turned and walked back into the darkness, dissolving into the mist until nothing remained. The weight lifted, the wind stilled, and the path before them was clear once more. Without hesitation, they fled the hill, their hearts racing, their breaths uneven, their minds forever changed. From that night onward, not one of those young people doubted the stories again. They carried with them a fear and respect that could not be shaken, a lesson etched into their souls. When the townspeople heard what had happened, they too were reminded of the importance of tradition, of reverence, of never mocking the mysteries that linger in the spaces between the living and the dead. For on that hill, in the shadows of time, the Guardian still waits, his glowing eyes watching, his loyalty unbroken, a silent reminder that there are some things in this world that must never be disturbed, and some spirits that once awakened must never be tested. No one could remember a time when the gray forest had been free of fog. It was not like the drifting mists of valleys at dawn, or the soft haze of morning dew. This fog was different. It was heavy, almost alive, wrapping itself around the trees like a burial shroud. It never lifted, never thinned, no matter the season. Even in the heart of summer, when the sun scorched the earth, the gray forest remained wrapped in its cold pallor. The villagers who lived nearest to the forest treated it like a forbidden temple. They would not enter, not even in daylight. Children were warned never to stray near its edge, and those foolish enough to test their bravery often returned pale and trembling, speaking of sounds in the mist, of shapes glimpsed between the trunks. To most, the forest was a place of silence and fear. To Alvaro, it was a challenge. Alvaro had been raised on stories of the supernatural. His grandmother's voice had carried these tales by firelight, whispering warnings in the night. Il susurrante, she called it, the whisperer, a shadow older than the forest itself, a being that did not devour flesh, but something far more precious, the truth of who you are. It fed on secrets, on fears, on the unspoken things that lived in the dark corners of the human heart. The villagers said those who wandered too deep never truly returned. Sometimes their bodies stumbled back, but their minds were gone, hollowed out by the endless murmurs of the fog. Alvaro, however, was not afraid, or perhaps more dangerously, he thought himself beyond fear. As he grew older, he studied legends, myths, and the paranormal. Where others saw stories, he saw clues, threads that hinted at real events hidden beneath layers of superstition. He was obsessed with proving that myths had origins, that ghosts had truths, and the whisperer became his greatest fixation. He prepared for weeks. Cameras, audio recorders, batteries, food, water, notebooks. He carried them all like a soldier preparing for war. He told no one of his plan. The villagers would try to stop him, and Alvaro would not allow fear to take root in him through their warnings. On a late autumn afternoon, when the world was brittle with cold and the sun bled weakly through a gray sky, he set out for the forest. The fog greeted him like a living gatekeeper. One step across the tree line, and the world behind him was gone. The path disappeared. The fields and houses vanished, swallowed in a wall of pale mist. He felt his chest tighten, but he forced himself onward. At first, there was nothing unusual. The forest floor was damp, the trees skeletal, their branches twisting high into the fog like claws. His boots sunk into the soft earth, each step crunching faintly on wet leaves. He recorded everything, speaking into his device with forced calm, noting the silence, the density of the mist, the absence of birdsong. But soon, the silence became too complete. He stopped. The sound of his own breathing was wrong. Too loud, too sharp. He clapped his hands once. The echo died instantly, as if the trees had swallowed it whole. His skin prickled with unease.
He muttered to himself, reminding his recorder that silence was natural in deep woods. But even as he said it, he felt the lie in his voice. The fog thickened. It pressed against him, cool and damp, crawling over his arms like a film of sweat. He rubbed at his skin, but the sensation clung stubbornly, as if the mist had fingers. And then faintly, he heard it. A whisper. So soft, so fragile, he thought at first it was only his imagination, a trick of nerves. He stood still, straining his ears. The whisper returned, slipping between the trees. It had no direction, no origin, yet it was unmistakably there. Words, muffled and broken, spoken in a voice too distant to identify. His heart raced. He turned in slow circles, recorder lifted, trying to catch the sound. "Testing? Is anyone there?" His own words sounded hollow, swallowed by the fog. But the whisper answered, not with clarity, but with persistence. It grew louder, layering over itself, until it was no longer one voice, but many. Alvaro's breath came fast now. He took a step, then another, following blindly. The whispers twisted around him, calling his name, murmuring half-formed confessions. He stumbled, clutching his recorder like a lifeline. And then he froze. The voices were not only around him, they were inside him. They spoke his thoughts out loud, memories he had never shared, fears he had buried so deeply he hardly admitted them to himself. His failures, his doubts, his private shames spilled into the air, spoken in voices not his own. His hands shook violently. He covered his ears, but the whispers came from within, vibrating in his skull. Then the fog parted. It stepped forth, or perhaps it had always been there, waiting for him to see. A shape without shape, a figure woven from shadow and mist. Its body shifted like smoke, infinite and undefined. Eyes opened across the dark mass, unblinking, cold, glimmering like distant stars. And then came its mouth, not a mouth of flesh, but a jagged tear in reality itself. From it, the whispers poured like poisoned wind, endless, merciless, devouring.
They told Alvaro who he was. They told him what he had hidden. They told him they would take everything. With a strangled cry, Alvaro broke free. He turned and ran, his camera swinging wildly against his chest, his recorder capturing nothing but his gasps and sobs. The forest blurred around him. The fog pressed in, and the whispers followed. No matter how far he fled, the voices chased him, breathing on his neck, curling into his ears. He stumbled, fell hard onto the wet earth, and lay there trembling, waiting for the shadow to claim him. His eyes squeezed shut, his body shaking with terror. He braced for the cold touch, but it never came. When at last he dared to look, the fog was thinning. The forest was silent again. The whisperer was gone. Alvaro staggered out of the trees at dawn, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He left behind his equipment, scattered in the forest, too afraid to retrieve it. He never spoke of what he saw, not to his colleagues, not to his family. To the villagers, he was a man who had tempted fate and returned. To Alvaro himself,
he was something less, because the whispers never truly left. At night, when he lay half asleep, he heard them, soft, persistent, curling into the edges of his mind. He would wake drenched in sweat, whispering back without realizing it, answering voices that were not his own. Each day he felt them digging deeper, peeling away what was left of him. Alvaro understood now what the villagers had always known. The forest did not take lives, it took truths, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. And he feared more than death itself the day when the last piece of him would belong to the Whisperer.
Not all ruins are silent. Some breathe like sleeping beasts, their hearts hidden beneath rubble, their whispers carried in the wind. And in the forgotten heart of a city swallowed by time, there was such a ruin. Broken towers leaned like skeletons, alleys twisted into endless black, and in the center stood a door that did not belong to this world. It was not built by human hands. Carved from obsidian stone, so black it seemed to consume light itself, the door pulsed faintly, alive with symbols that shifted when no one was looking. Those who had dared to speak of it called it a wound in the skin of the earth, a gate to somewhere no mortal should ever step. The old stories had a name for it, the Door of Souls. They said that once in every 100 years, on the night when the moon was swallowed by clouds, the seal broke. The door would groan open, spilling a darkness not of this world. From that abyss, demons would crawl into the realm of the living, hunting for souls to claim, feasting until dawn drove them back to their abyss. The people called that cursed night the Night of Souls. Most fled from the legend, passing it down only in whispers, too afraid to even mark the places where the ruin might stand. But not Elena. Elena was different. She had been born with a hunger that fear could not tame. Where others turned away from the unknown, she leaned closer. She collected forgotten manuscripts, read grimoires wrapped in dust, traced symbols that priests had forbidden, and filled notebooks with every fragment of lore she could gather. To her, the tale of the Night of Souls was not just myth, it was a puzzle begging to be solved. And when the whispers reached her that the 100th year was nearly upon them, Elena did not tremble. She prepared. Around her neck hung amulets etched with protective wards. In her satchel lay chalk, salt, and herbs for ritual circles, and clutched to her chest was her most precious possession, an ancient book of spells, brittle with age, its ink faded, but its power intact. On the eve of the cursed night, she set out for the ruins. The journey itself felt wrong. The deeper she walked into the dead city, the more the world seemed to recoil. The air grew heavy, thick with a pressure that bent her shoulders. The silence was not absence, but anticipation.
Even the shadows seemed to gather, pointing her way. And then she saw it. The door loomed ahead, taller than any wall, swallowing the starlight above it. The symbols etched upon its surface stirred faintly, glowing with a sickly light that pulsed like veins. The earth rumbled beneath her boots. The symbols flared blue, burning like cold fire. With a groan that shook the ruins, the door split down the middle. A crack widened into an abyss, deeper than night, hungering with every inch it revealed. Elena's heart pounded, but she stood firm. And from the abyss they came. Twisted figures crawled through the gap, creatures shaped by nightmares, with claws that scraped stone and eyes that burned with cruel fire. Some were lean and skeletal, their limbs stretched too far. Others were hulking masses of shadow, dripping with black tar that steamed when it touched the ground. Their voices hissed like 1,000 snakes. Elena inhaled sharply and whispered her incantation. A barrier formed around her, invisible but solid, humming with power. The first wave of demons slammed into it, screeching as they were thrown back.
Her hands trembled, but her eyes did not leave them. In her notebook, she began sketching. Jaws like traps, wings like tattered cloth, skin that seemed to shift like smoke. This was her proof. This was history unfolding. But fascination is a luxury, and luxury is fleeting. The air shifted again, colder, heavier, wrong. The smaller demons recoiled, hissing as something vast approached. It emerged slowly, towering above the horde. A demon unlike the rest. Its body was carved from fire and shadow, its chest glowing faintly like embers in a furnace. Horns coiled around its head, and its grin split wide, filled with serrated teeth. Its eyes locked on Elena. This one was not mindless. It radiated intelligence, malice, hunger. And when it raised its hand, Elena felt her blood freeze. Her barrier shattered. The invisible force slammed into her, dragging her toward the abyss. Her boots dug into the stone, her fingers clawed at the ground, but nothing slowed the pull. She was being claimed. Her mind screamed, but her will did not falter. With one last desperate lunge, she clutched her spellbook and cried the words of sealing. The pages glowed faintly, then blazed with furious light. The door groaned again, not opening, but closing. The demon's grin widened. It laughed, the sound shaking her bones. "You think this is victory, mortal?" it whispered, though its mouth never moved. "No seal holds forever. You are marked. I will come for you.
I will always come for you." The abyss howled as the door slammed shut. Elena collapsed, gasping, her fingers still clenched around the book. The ruins fell silent, but the silence was no comfort. She had escaped, but not untouched. She could feel it, a weight pressing against her soul, a darkness that had brushed her essence and left its scar. From that night forward, Elena lived with a purpose. She devoted herself to studying demons, searching for rituals, weapons, and spells that could strengthen her for the night when the door would open again. Her notebooks filled with sketches of twisted forms, diagrams of wards, translations of languages no human should read. But no matter how many candles she lit, no matter how many wards she etched upon her walls, the whispers followed. Sometimes, when the night was still, she heard it. A laugh, a whisper, a promise. And she knew her life was not survival, it was only a pause. The demon had not forgotten. It had marked her. It was waiting. The door remains, hidden, patient, breathing in silence, and beyond it, the demons linger in the abyss, whispering with one voice, not if, when. When the 100 years pass again, the night of souls will return, and this time the door will not close.